I'm an intern at the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and our next session is an Eco-Memoir panel. But before we get to that, this is our 4th annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. It's presented by the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center, and we're so glad you could join us for today's free sessions here at Old Bay Place. And while these events are free to attend, they are not without costs. We hope you will consider making a donation in support to the Pat Conroy Center in the donation box right back there. So, our next session is an Eco-Memoir panel discussion with writers Janisse Ray and John Lane. Following this session, the writers will be signing books downstairs in the breezeway with Macintosh Bookshop. Their conversation will be moderated by Megan Mayhew Bergman, the author of Birds of a Lesser Paradise, Almost Famous Woman, and a forthcoming novel. She has served as the Associate Director of Bennington College's MFA program and now teaches as Middlebury College's Director of the Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference. Her work has been published in the New York Times, The New Yorker, The Guardian, Plowshares, Harris Review, Oxford American, and Best American Short Stories. John Lane is a professor of English and Environmental Studies at Beaufort College, the author of numerous books of essays and poetry, and a 2015 inductee into our state's Literary Hall of Fame, the South Carolina Academy of Authors. His books include Waist Deep in Black Water, Chattooga, Circling Home, Coyote Settles in the South, and most recently Neighborhood Hawks. His newest book documents the life of hawks and contemplates the relationship between animals and humans when they live in such close proximity. Janisse Ray is a writer and activist and naturalist who has authored 5 books of literary nonfiction and a collection of eco-poetry. She was a 2015 inductee into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. She holds an MFA from the University of Montana and 2 honorary doctorates, and was the Rubin Writer-in-Residence at Collins University during spring 2018. Her first book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, shows her childhood in a junkyard as the daughter of a poor, white, fundamentalist Christian family. The book interweaves family history and memoir with natural history writing, and has been honored with the American Book Award and the Southern Book Critics Circle Award, amongst others. Please welcome Megan Mayhew Bergman, John Lane, and Janisse Ray. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. This is a total pleasure for me. So I grew up in the South. I was born in Gaffney, South Carolina. Yes, amazing. We have a pretty great water tower there. Yeah, I may know it. So I spent the first 30 years of my life in the South, but then fell in love with a veterinarian in Vermont. And so every November I start getting this incredible homesickness. So know that I am delighted to be here and to get to speak with 2 humans that I admire. And I say humans because I admire their work on a very human level, and then I admire them as artists. And I do make a distinction between the 2. And I taught their work, and they've been kind of friends to me in ways that they may not be aware of. So John and I got to spend a couple of days on a retrofitted shrimp boat on a river in Georgia, as one does. and I think we had one of our greatest conversations sitting at a picnic table on Ossabaw, feeding carrots to some rogue donkeys. Yeah, that's a good way to make a friend. And Janisse's book, The Seed Underground, was a book that I found when I was a new mother living on a farm in Vermont for the first time. I was just coming out of the fog of postpartum depression, and I wanted to think about, how do I connect to this place that does not feel like home? And I don't know if any of you have ever been in that space before, but it's a profound moment where you're trying to make a connection through the land. And thinking about seeds, thinking about gardening was so moving to me and so important. So you were a comfort then, and your words were. So when we think about writing and publishing can be an act of commerce. It can also be an act of love, an act of investigation, an act of humanity. And I find myself more drawn to books that are in the latter part of that camp, and thinking about what it is to be human, what it is to be a species, what it is to be engaged with the natural world. And I think these 2 writers have done such an exceptional job grounding that work in place. And I think of each book as an act of paying And so I'd love to kind of hear from you guys. John, I know you really identify with the Piedmont and your place in South Carolina. And I just wanted to read quickly this quote from Janisse's book. And you guys may know this quote, it's often quoted, but she wrote, "I may not have a lot of hope, but I have plenty of love, which gives me fight. We are going to have to learn to fall in love with the place again and learn to stay put." So I'd love to start by asking both of you just how home functions in your artistic lives.
Well, for me, it's the center. It's literally the center. The house we live in on the banks of a floodplain, if you know what I mean. It's not on the creek, but it's maybe 100 yards back from the creek where the floodplain starts to get some elevation. I've thought about it a lot, about how all of these Georgia books that I've published, these memoirs, almost all have at least a scene, if not more, in that house, around that house. One book is about circling the house for a mile and exploring for a month everything within that circle and writing chapters about the country club that I never visited and the sewer treatment plant and the agricultural fields across the river and the Native American site up the creek. And so home for me, I mean, and my work is literally centered in home often. I wrote a column for 2.5 years. I didn't miss a Monday. It was due at 10 o'clock every Monday, and I wouldn't get started on it until 5 a.m. that morning. The column had 660 words, 666 words is what I had to write. And I'd write this column and then take them in, and Betsy would read them and make corrections. And probably out of those 250 or so columns I wrote over a number of years, I'd say 175 or 200 of them started there at the house somehow, with some image, an abiding image. Janisse loves that term too. I know that the term of the abiding, the idea of an image can start something. So home's always been the center for me.
This idea of fragmentation really is a thread through all my work. And so my life has been this effort to try to make a life of wholeness. And that has meant that I've been a place-based writer. I think so many of us, because of the circumstances of the 21st century and mainly because of industrial capitalism, asking us to move far away from places we were born for jobs or careers, Fulbright scholarships, whatever, we become homeless people. And the great philosopher Kathleen Dean Moore, who is at the University of Oregon, she said in an interview in The Sun magazine that we don't lead lives of quiet desperation. We lead lives of relentless separation. And that includes from our families, our clans, our kinspeople, our landscapes. So my life so far has been this long journey to try to make my existence as whole as possible. Things have recently changed, and so I'm not going to sit here and be nostalgic about my home. I live in a very rural, very fundamentalist, very difficult place to live, which is Tattnall County, Georgia. It's just across the Altamaha River from my birthplace, Applin County. It's a very difficult place to live. I have an essay in the current Georgia Review called The Lonely Ruralist. So I think the South, the rural South, and rural America have suffered so many devastations. And one of those devastations is the loss of imagination, the loss of art. And you can find it if you go to cities, if you come to the coast where there are art galleries and so forth. But I do not have it where I live, and I am suffering because of it, and it's my home. So I'm still trying to reconcile what home means. And I'm not nostalgic about it.
Yeah, nostalgia is, for me, it's one of the dangers of writing. I notice that I actually tend toward it. And I think it's really interesting to think about how nostalgia functions in the way we live our lives and in our creative practice. Janisse, there's a line that you have from Ecology Ecology of a Cracker Childhood that says, "I carry the landscape inside of me like an ache." And I'd love to hear from both of you, just given the changes that we're seeing in the landscapes of our youth and landscapes of our lives. What is it that makes you ache right now that you feel like you're carrying?
Yeah, well, right now, I talk about logging cycles in the South. You know, we lost most of our old growth right after the Civil War. And then since then, we've just been in these cycles of logging. And when the price of lumber goes down, we get out of it very briefly. It's not really a cycle that we've been in. We have watched in the South relentless destruction of our landscapes. And so that is the ache. You know, the ache that I was talking about in that line was just reconciliation of this cultural past with this environmental past. And that's not the ache that is happening in my body now. I mean, it's sometimes difficult to leave my home because whatever direction you travel, log trucks filled with very huge, mostly hardwood logs now are being transported out. And I just think the landscape is so important to our psyches as people. And I worry about what's happening to my psyche and what's happening to your psyche as we just wholesale and systematically tear up where we're from.
My next project that I've been working on for a year or so now is a book that I want to call Gullies of My People. And my folks, my people, go back in the Piedmont of South Carolina for, in this one county, in Spartanburg County, for about 6 or 7 generations after they came down from the mountains to work in the textile mills and also to work these marginal farms. And I do a lot of work with scientists. I go out and travel with earth scientists and write articles out of it often. And there were these soil scientists that have been working in Spartanburg County on gullies. And I went with one of them, a friend of mine, up to the upper part of Spartanburg County and realized that one of the gullies that we were looking at, and he was checking out and finding all this data from the 1930s that these scientists had collected back then, was a gully that my people had created by their farming. And so I suddenly had this deep connection to how this gully destroyed landscape, where 20 centimeters on the average of topsoil was washed into the rivers between 1800 and 1940, was because my folks were trying to make a living growing corn. And it started me thinking about, if I've got an ache, it's this ache of that I'm complicit in this myself. That my family and my family had a part in this destruction of this landscape. Rather than trees moving out of our county, it's houses going up in the fields where I live. And so living in a suburb makes me think a lot about that, and ache about that.
I think that word complicit is such an interesting term for Southerners and things that or for anyone with regards to our relationship with the environment. My people were 7 generations of poor illiterate farmers in Virginia, but before that they were whalers in Nantucket, and I feel like I carry that strange sort of guilt, or thoughtfulness or mindfulness of those things. Thinking about the reverse process, perhaps, which is how do you see instances of healing happening, or renewal, or rewilding, or even how do you nourish yourself during this sort of stressful age that we're in? Either nourishing yourself or your creative practice, or whatever that sparks in you.
Well, one thing for me, I've sort of shifted from a period of about 10 years where I wrote almost exclusively about rivers and river trips. And now, for the last 2 books, I've been writing about animals, southern animals. And the book before this one, this Hawk book, was a book called Coyote Settles the South. And I found great joy and hope in the survival of coyotes in North America, and how they've been persecuted for 150 years now, and we haven't We haven't killed them. They're expanding. Their range is expanding. There'll be a coyote looking over at Antarctica pretty soon, going, I think I want to go over there. They're already in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And I find great hope in that in a weird way. I know that I argued all the way through the book. Some people think that they're invasive in the South, and I chose to call them settlers rather than invasives in my title, and I struggle with that. I know they eat cats, I know they do all that bad stuff, but I find great hope in coyotes.
Last weekend, my husband, who's here, Raven, and our daughter, Sky, and I visited Montgomery, and we went through the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which are museums devoted to the genocide of lynching, the genocide of African American people in the South. They're very hard museums. I just say you have to do it. You have to go, but they're very hard museums to get through. So when I think about my, white privilege or complicitness and my complicitness in any kind of degradation of human beings, of the earth, of the atmosphere, activism is really the only thing that gives me hope. That I belong to the NAACP then is a matter of pride in my mind as I walk through the lynching museum, and on and on and on. I mean, for me, it's that I write books out of that hope. Everything I do in my life is an act of some sort of activism, and that's how I keep going, and it's how I keep my glass half full instead of half empty, and it's how I love this life.
Yeah, that's powerful. I know that you guys have been friends for 20 years, I think.
Yep.
People often say the writing community is a little smaller than you think it is. But also, I find like finding your people is a great reward in terms of the way it shapes your artistic possibilities and gives you feedback and understanding. But I'd love to hear from you guys about your literary friendship and how the literary community works that way.
You want to start? John and I met many years ago when I was a student at the University of Montana, and we both heard about this group, ASLE, Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment. And for both of us, it was exactly what we were interested in and what we were doing. And so we met at their first or second conference, just by chance. And then, because we didn't know, think of nature writers. There was this huge nature writing movement in the West with Ed Abbey and Terry Tempest Williams and Rick Bass and William Kittredge, who I'd studied under. But there weren't many in the South. We had Bartram and Bartram come through in the 1700s, and we had John Muir come through. Then we had Marjorie Canaan Rawlings. You can name on 1 to 2 hands the people who were really combining this love of place. Interestingly, although Pat Conroy is a novelist, mostly a novelist, he learned very early on. Do y'all remember his story of meeting the poet Archibald Rutledge? Remember that? And Rutledge says to him, you have to learn the names of wild things because that's going to inform your writing. Let me jump forward and say John and I began to organize things as a team. We have brought in other people. Next weekend, actually, we have another gathering of Southern nature writers at Wormslow, which is on the Georgia coast. We have Franklin Burroughs coming in from Maine, people who were born in the South or live in the South or write about the South and write about nature. And we've been doing these kinds of gatherings for 25 years. Many projects have come out of this. And John, I'm going to hush and let you take the mic, but I want to say one other thing, because he may forget to say it. In his town of Spartanburg, so Betsy, John's wife, is sitting here. Betsy and John, and they were the main people who started this press called Hub City Writers Project. Betsy wrote a piece in Orion Afield, the magazine, probably 20 years ago, about what they were doing in Spartanburg. One of the ways it's been so successful is that they meet every morning at a restaurant in town for a cup of coffee. Whoever has a free moment, they know that somebody's going to be there between 7 and 8 or whatever. John can talk to you about this later. I have seen so many amazing projects come out of those coffee conversations every morning. If you are sick with cancer and you have a support network and this other person is sick with cancer and that person does not, who lives longest? We all need community. We need it to even survive. So for us as writers, it has been, of utmost importance, not just to survive, but to thrive and to really leave a legacy with our lives of books and tours and films and plays and on and on.
Amen.
What do you have to say after all that?
How important community is to me, and Betsy's helped to create that community through this organization, the Hub City Writers Project. And when we met in Montana in 97, maybe something like that, I knew right away when I went back to Spartanburg and we were working on this big project where I wanted to celebrate and have a festival on every river in Spartanburg County. I wanted to have a festival that followed from the headwaters to the confluence of every single river that went through Spartanburg County. And I came back and I pitched this to Betsy and she said, no, maybe one river, let's choose one and do it. And so we did choose a stream that we now live on called Lawson's Fork. And we set up a festival that went day to day down this river, and hundreds and people came out every day for whatever the activity was. But when we were conceiving it, I said, well, I know this poet, soon-to-be prose writer, named Janisse Ray. She said, just got this tiny little flexible book of poetry, all she's got, but this book she's working on might do okay. So let's bring her to Spartanburg and make her the Creek's first writer in residence. And so we did. We brought her in, and we got a scientist, and we had a scientist and Janisse go that whole week down the river and maybe be some of the first bloggers in upstate South Carolina ever. They blogged every day. They came back and put pictures and stuff up. But then about the third day she was there, she goes downtown and she gets a newspaper and she brings it back. And it's a special newspaper. It's the newspaper of note called the New York Times. And the New York Times has and I'm blowing this up, but the New York Times has a massive story that says, the headline says, the South has found its Rachel Carson. And she was there that day that came out. And she stayed. She didn't leave. She didn't say, I'm going home. Rachel Carson's going home. Because she felt what we were doing there was good.
I was just at the last session where the woman was pretending to be Rachel Carson. I just wanted to raise my hand like, do you know I'm the new Rachel Carson? Just sit down now.
But we were great friends after that. And I'm always trying to pull Janisse into whatever we're doing. She's been in a couple of Hub City books. And also, she's pulled me into the wonderful work she's been doing through the years.
Into the manure of my stables.
The poetics of that are beautiful. I had a therapist friend say, what is it? He said, sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the shit fertilizer of life. I keep that in mind. So I too have benefited, as an emerging writer from the community that was built in Spartanburg, and I had a really eventful reading where there was an opera singer singing in the space next door as I was trying to read. It was memorable and well attended, and I loved it. What I was hoping that you guys would do is read a page from a book of choice, and you each have plenty to choose from, but just to give you guys a sense of this beautiful prose and what these writers are putting forth. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
So this is my new book. I discovered an English nature writer about 2 or 3 years ago named J.A. Baker. Wrote a phenomenal book called Peregrine, and it blew me away. And then I realized, wait a minute, he followed peregrine falcons for 4 years and then condensed it Thoreau style into 1 year. And I said, wait a minute, we've been in this house for close to 15 years now, and I've been watching these red-shouldered hawks in our yard for all that time, and if he can follow peregrines, I can follow red-shouldered hawks. So I made a commitment to myself that anytime I saw these birds, I would leave whatever I was doing and follow them, and keep an almanac, and see what came of it, and not add anything, and do it all in 1 year. If I didn't get enough in a year, it was too bad. That was all I was getting. So it was kind of scary, because there were moments when I said, there's not enough. But I'm going to just read a passage from that. From about this time, this is 30th of October. I don't have any years next to it. Sunday morning, I'm back sitting in the floodplain grove again. Yesterday I was on a hike with a friend at a lake, and a red-shouldered hawk landed on the nearby crosspiece of an array of purple martin gourds. I found these hawks to be curious of me, he said, and I was jealous. He told several stories of his intimate interactions over time. He said he'd seen them eating crayfish along the edge of the lake. The bird we watched rotated its head and checked us out, then dropped from the crosspiece on a small creature below and disappeared into the brush along the lake edge. Tomorrow is Halloween. Isn't that when all things take flight? Maybe the ghost of raptors past will fill the evening skies. Sightings and imaginings pile up. Curious, shadowy conjectures flock in my mind. I hear a mower start up, and I go avian and avoid the nearby neighbors out doing chores. I go flying and move quietly above their houses. I am as inconspicuous as the hawks I seek. I am imperceptible, folded into the suburban day so fully that when I pass over, I might as well be the wind. I rise into the living body of a hawk. Then I land in a tree to perch patiently, to sight along the narrow barrel of my native vision until some prey moves, and I lock down and drift from above, and I seize it. Snake, lizard, mouse, mole, or shrew. Among the river cane and privet hedges, I settle in, my life now in full flight.
I'm a speck in the life of this river. I'm a blink in the long eye of history that stares us down. Before long, I too will be gone into the ground with only a book left behind as proof that I loved the place where I existed, the place in which I was born and for most of my life chose to live. I will die and be buried, hopefully, a mile or two from the river that was as if my own backbone, and my grave will grow thick with grass. For 11,000 years at least, people have lived here. First, those we call natives. They did not arrive by boat as Europeans did. They arrived on foot or by horse. Hernando de Soto, Spaniard, came through in the 1500s. The French wandered near. Revolutionary soldiers gathered along Old River Road, a mile from where I now live, on which the Confederate Army and the Union Army also marched. On this land, up and down this river, people with me with dreams, with preferences, with hair whose color slowly seeps to gray, were born, lived, and died. What I grieve are the lost stories. I am less sad that the stagecoach driver is gone than that his stories are gone. I was only one of the fallen, wrote Linda Hogan, in a lineage of fallen worlds and people. Once my neighbor, Winton Miles, told me a strange story. Did you hear about the Indian woman, he said? I'll tell you just how it was. When the government ran the Indians out of here, they thought they got them all. One stayed on this creek, Bay Creek, down near the swamp. She escaped the soldiers and hid out. She lived in the woods for many years. She was the only one left. She would stay in the woods until she nearly perished. Then she got so hungry and weak, she had to come out. People had sentiments for her, and they'd help her. Were my imagination greater, I would grant stories to the souls lost to history. Were I able to hear with my bones, I would know the underside of their colossal silence. I would channel them. We are each born afresh, to create afresh, to make logic of whatever order we have entered, which is always changing. The wiregrass flats, the ancient pine forests, the swamps full of swollen base trees, the nests of the kites, the brilliant whiteness of the sandbars, all almost gone. And I must make order of the pine plantations, my neighbors' trailer homes, the smell of chicken shit from industrial broiler houses, the pollution, the hate mail. Therefore, history is interesting, but I think what matters most is this moment. This moment of the river matters to me, and it matters to you because this is a moment I am living for you. This is a story I'm writing for you, full of moments that are also yours. Whoever you are, on your river, the moment matters. What doesn't fade is the place. For 20 million years, it has not faded. This vehicle of mystery, keeper of lost secrets, course of history, eternal found. Now is the moment to know it. O river, friend river, some of your stories have been set free.
Water. It seems like it is a point of gravity for a lot of Southerners, but I think particularly those of us with an environmental bent. And I would love to hear, I often caution my students who are writing about water because I say, watch out, water is one big metaphor waiting to happen. And everyone has their baggage that they're going to bring to this. But I'm interested in your pull toward water and how that functions for you.
Well, we listened on the way down to a long New Yorker article about astrology, so I need to say that I'm a Scorpio, so all about water. That must be the base of it, you know. But I don't know. Ever since college, for me it came recreationally. I began to canoe in college, and I was really bad at it, whitewater canoe. I ended up spending much more time underneath scouting trout, as we call it, rather than paddling through the rapids. But I stayed with it, and within 3 or 4 years, I was good enough as a kayaker where I could paddle and love and learn to sort of forget that I was in a boat doing some recreation and just take part in the experience of being on a river. And I think that's how mostly I fell in love with rivers, was through recreation. It led me there. And I think the same, maybe, Janisse, you were a canoeist and learned to canoe.
Yeah, but it's a really hard question. Oh, go ahead, Mike. It's a hard question for me because I don't feel particularly drawn to rivers. I'm definitely terrestrial, I'm on them just to get from one place to another, mostly. I have this one book about rivers, and I made the mistake of reading from it, but water is not a big issue for me. And I don't know why, because water is life, but it's not something I think about a lot. I don't know.
This is a great river book, by the way. We had our books, two of our river books came out the same year, so it was really interesting.
And I think maybe Southerners, remember James Dickey and the Chattooga, and I remember this quote I've been wanting to quote from Pat Conroy, which is, he said, if you want me to show you my childhood, you've got to come to the coast on a spring day. Let me pop an oyster open for. I'm butchering the quote, but and you smell deeply and taste, and I will say that smell, that's the taste of my childhood, or that's the smell of, and you will never forget it. So that has nothing to do with water.
Perhaps the power of sensory memory.
Sorry.
No, it's great. I prefer honesty. Don't you guys? Yeah. The last question I want to ask before I turn it over to the audience for Q&A, because I know they have questions.
I think they have questions about the memoir part of Eco-Memoir.
We've been doing a lot of eco, but not much.
Yeah, not much.
Heavily on the eco here, and that's on me. Thinking in terms of advocacy and what brings you to the page in the first place, can you speak to what your calling is, what you feel as a writer, what your purpose is, and what you're doing.
Boy, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm joking, but I think my calling is to be attentive. You mentioned attention, and the quality that I think plays through all of my poetry and all of my prose books is that suddenly I bring enough attention to something to stay with it for a while and to get something what I feel is right, and to hope that other people feel I got it right too. And because of that, I don't think I'm probably as much of an advocate or activist as Janisse is. But I do tend toward that sometimes. But I'd say attention is my calling. To attend, to be attentive. You know.
Megan, that was the question. What is our calling? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Mine is changing, so I always would say, I don't care about success, and I don't care about fame, I don't care about money. Literally, I've said that hundreds of times, that I care about the way we live on the landscape. Like, I don't want to see everything vanish in front of our eyes. I don't want to lose, I don't want to see our seas rise and have the atmosphere change and lose habitat, more habitat, and have more species on the endangered species list. I don't. But lately, I've really begun to change that. So, in fact, in a recent talk, a retrospective I gave of like 20 years of my writing, I actually admitted, like, I'm an empire builder, which is like I'm trying to create something bigger here. And that bigger might have something to do with money. It might be more than just trying to see change. But I will always go back and say my first desire is I'd like to see us learn to live more sustainable lives on these landscapes that produced us, that produced our cultures, that produced human civilization. I'd like us to grow up a little and leave behind something that we can call a civilization. And I think our stories, if we segue in here into writing, I think our stories are important, that our culture makes us look at stars, the Paris Hiltons, the Britney Spears, the Taylor Swifts of the world. But I think civilization and culture are a lot of stories that we're all telling that help explain life in a place, that help us find meaning, And so much of our lives take meaning away. The 3,000 advertisements we see a day, are not creating meaning for our existences. They're doing the opposite. And that's why, that's essentially what storytelling is from all of us. And I think even if you're writing murder mysteries and crime stories or whatever, on some level you are adding to this great body of work that furthers civilization.
Can I add one thing to that? Storytelling. Oh, God. We went to a presentation 3 days ago in Spartanburg for a large corporation that has partnered with National Geographic for corporate storytelling, and National Geographic has agreed to run 3 stories a year in their beautiful magazine about this company's products and how and it's all about green and being sustainable. But I got so depressed because I realized that storytelling is so positive, but it's also something that's been entirely seized by corporate America. And I'm going, how are we going to sort this out? How are we going to do it? I mean, if you've got National Geographic and you can open it and you can read a story and not realize that a large corporation paid for that story, put in there to help their brand. And I just went, man, storytelling is in trouble if that's the case.
Keep telling those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, stories about the story.
Yeah.
What do they call them? Thought platforms. They call these thought platforms, not stories. Thought platforms. And you were thought makers. Yeah, thought makers. Not storytellers. Thought makers.
Well, I know that some of you would would like to get into perhaps more of the writing, since I did such an egregious job focusing on the environment. But I think thinking about, asking these guys about craft, about how to conjure emotional truth or how to conjure place on the page, I'd just love to open it up to the audience.
Bring it on. Your questions.
Or if you want to ask a question about ecology or the environment.
Well, I'm a South Carolina native. I'm from the upstate, and you can tell by my accent. I'm from Oconee County, the Golden Corner. Observing, growing up there and living, somehow I was able to stay and have a corporate career. But some of what I see in economic development in our state is, it almost reminds me of a third world country. Now, obviously, we're more developed than that, but it's like, here are our beautiful mountains, our lakes, the Chattooga, and of course, I'm down here in Beaufort, and I am an outdoors person. So come and destroy it, come and destroy it. So, my question is, for the actual quality of life that we're living, because I see native South Carolinians who somehow are being influenced in an opposite direction. People who walk these woods, who hunted, who fish and all that, but who drive their diesel pickup trucks and do something called cold rolling right in front of you to blow out diesel smoke to show that, by golly, to hell with you if you're an environmentalist. These are the kind of things that are happening in South Carolina today because of our political environment. It's like people are being exploited and our natural landscape is being exploited. How do you, maybe this is a statement and not a question, but how do we bring other native South Carolinians back into telling those stories of what they love, not what they are angry about?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think that it's got to happen case by case, that's what I think about every day. I live in a place with 2 hunting tracks on each side of us, and I have very different. I'm not a deer hunter, but a lot of friends are, but I have very different values than the people who hunt on those 2 tracks, and yet they're my neighbors, and I have to continue to ask, how do I come to some middle space between their space and my space? Because there's got to be a middle, and I think that's the question we got to ask just constantly, politically today, is how do we find that middle space? Can we, not how, but can we find that middle space?
Well, if I can just comment here, I grew up in a family that does strip mining, and it goes back to the family. It's always been a family business, and it's always been a business that cared about its employees and its people and its community. Now, that's not true about some of our competitors, because we have multinational competitors that come from wherever. Our business grew up in Beaufort, and I think there is a middle ground, because a lot of the people I worked with who did hunt and fish were not really excited about strip mining. Even though it provided them a job, even though it provided their whatever they were doing with the secondary jobs and so forth. It's just like our politics today. We can't say it's all us or nothing, and nothing else is right.
I grew up in Atlanta and sold real estate there. And my family, mother was from Waycross, Georgia, and her parents were involved in a hunting and fishing club in South Georgia. And yes, they hunted the deer and the turkey and they fished, but it was a preservation. If you go down there right now, it looks almost like it did 100 years ago when it was bought. So there is a marriage. If you love the land and you take have both, but you have to have the consciousness. That's what I write about. My stories take place at this hunting club. And so there is a way.
And I would think in some ways this is a lot about honoring complexity, and I would kind of turn it back to the writing here and ask you guys how you honor complexity in your work.
Well, I think one great thing is to look at Flannery O'Connor and what she says in Mystery and Manners. Like, so much is just handed to us in the South. There's all these inherent tensions, and that's one of them, you know. So you're trying to create tension in your short stories and in your novels, and it's given to you. It's given to you in the South in our language, in our history, and how we interact with each other. It's a gift.
I've spent a lot of time. Recently, I've read 4 great nonfiction books this year by environmental or nature writers. Barry Lopez's Horizon, Robert McFarlane's Underland, a novel, The Overstory by Richard Powers, and then recently an incredible book by Kathleen Jamie, a poet and essayist from Scotland, called Surfacing. And all I've been thinking about, this is such a geeky thing, but all I've been thinking about these books is the use of tense, how tenses operate in this prose. I think all the time when I sit down to write as a nonfiction writer, do I want to use that present tense that I see everywhere that I hate, or do I want to use past tense and make it a little more reflective and deal with it? And that kind of decision is what I end up spending a lot of my time thinking about, not whether or not this is going to contribute to the conversation about climate change, denial, whatever, but is it going to be in present tense or is it going to be in past tense? And Betsy knows from this novel that I've just finished and it's coming out in the fall, I changed it 5 times. I flipped back and forth. And every time I had to go back and so tense. And I'm worried about this bird flying around.
What I would add to going back to the blowing smoke is what John said. It's got to happen on an individual basis, but it's got to happen over and over and over again. As a damn Yankee in the middle of Georgia, I have had a number of conversations with chemical farmers, people that I would think are the polar opposite of what my thinking is. But as long as it don't use certain buzzwords, you can have a conversation. But if you use certain buzzwords, the walls go up. So I think it just has to happen on an individual basis, over and over. And there's some, probably people that are blowing smoke out of the truck. There's some you're just not going to reach, and I wouldn't even waste my time.
I also grew up in Waycross, Georgia, in the river swamps, and in the summers I picked tobacco in Baxley. Worked in the tobacco field my entire teenage years. I've kept alive, the old stories for my children about, the farms and the river swamps. I've told them about, how Tupelo honey comes to be from the very first blossom until the beekeepers take them away. It's got to be 97% pure to be called Tupelo honey. My kids love this stuff, but they tell me that everybody else doesn't understand they're losing this. Their parents aren't telling them these things. Their grandparents didn't tell them. And so eventually it feels like it'll lost. How do you keep that going? I mean, so many people don't even read anymore. Men are not reading much anymore. 80% of the fiction market now are women. I mean, how do you keep that alive?
So this is the question. So I called this Wormslow gathering next weekend. I'm organizing it. And that is the question that I'm struggling with too, which is in a world that's changing so rapidly, mostly because of technological changes, what should our response be? How do we as storytellers fit in? How do we keep alive these old stories? Are they necessary to keep alive? So I can't sit here and answer that question for you because I'm struggling with it myself. Do you want to say anything? Yeah.
I myself, and Barry Lopez was in college. He brought his dog named Lobo. I remember
She said she went to college with
I went to college. I'm
Mary
just saying, I went
Lopez.
to college
Yeah,
with
my
Mary
mic was
Lopez.
on.
It means nothing except, it was just a comment. But I was one childhood, spent most of my time in Atlanta, moved here 3 years ago. So I have a perspective on South Carolina that's a little different. I actually wrote a novel called Abbeville Farewell, a novel of early Atlanta, North Georgia, because most of the non-Indian settlers of Atlanta, what became Atlanta, came from Abbeville District, and I was interested to find out why. Actually had a lot to do with abolitionism. But anyway, long story short, I came to South Carolina because of grandchildren, and also because of the area and the crowded conditions in Atlanta were just really getting to me. It's a city I love, it's an area I love. What you were raising about South Carolina, I've been amazed at how many resistors there have been in South Carolina all along. There's a terrific undercurrent of people who really care about the environment. The noise goes to the media. The noise is the politicians or the people of a different thinking. But there is such an undercurrent of strength here. I'm just really amazed. And people have an opportunity to speak that. And so there's no area of the country that has it on one of the others or what's the best place. I'm really impressed with the spirit that's here. And people like yourself, looking at your environment and speaking of it, create an ethic of this is the way we should be thinking about our place. And this is what we should be doing to protect it. So thank you for both of you for writing so beautifully. Make that possible.
Is there anything else you guys would like to add? I imagine we're coming to the end of our time here, and I know we're all grateful for hearing from you. Is there anything else?
Well, if you're here with the writing conference and you're here to write stories, then I just wish you all the best. People, as when I was beginning, I just thought, who wants to hear about what I have to say? And that's one of the most important things I say when I teach writing workshops is, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what your life has been like. I want to hear what you know that I haven't been able to learn. So I want to encourage you to do the work to become a great writer and get the stories down, if that's what you're here for. And if you're just here because you love books, then bless you.
And I'd like to end by saying that when Janisse was in Montana, I used to get really mad when I'd see that Kitteridge thing, the last best place, that Montana was somehow the last best place. And I kept saying, South Carolina Piedmont's a pretty doggone good place. It's stuck between this place and the mountains, and everybody thinks it's a drive-through rather than a fly-through zone. But I would say, encourage you to realize that every place you are is the best place. That it's right there. It's the 10 feet around your house, and it's the best place. So.
God, I just love writers. Thank you. Thank you for your